I'd see something like this in the heart of the city. On a cold, rainy morning, right by the roadside, I found a torn, filthy sack. Next to it lay a piece of soaked cardboard with crude letters scrawled across it. Not worth saving. I pulled the sack open, and my heart shattered. Inside was a Doberman puppy, barely a month old, so thin its ribs jutted out, yet its belly bulged like a melon ready to burst. It didn't bark, didn't whine. It only gasped for air, eyes empty, as if the whole world had already abandoned it. And in that instant, I knew. If I turned my back and walked away, I would be agreeing with the death sentence written on that cardboard. I dropped to my knees on the cold, wet pavement, rain dripping onto my shoulders, seeping through every thread of cloth. The sack trembled slightly with the rasp of its weak breathing. I slid my hand inside and touched a tiny, wet body, trembling violently. When I pulled it out, my whole body froze. It was a Doberman puppy, barely a month old. Black and tan fur matted with mud, legs as thin as sticks, a tiny head struggling to lift before collapsing again. But what made my chest lock tight was that swollen, rock-hard belly. I'd served as a medic in the Army. I knew immediately, this wasn't gas, this wasn't a full stomach. It was either a tumor or a massive infection, something that was stealing the space where the heart, the liver, the stomach, life itself, was meant to be. The stench hit me like a blow. The metallic tang of blood, the sour rot of infection, and the damp, rotting trash around us. My eyes fell to the cardboard by the sack, the ink bleeding in the rain. Not worth saving. My throat closed. This wasn't abandonment. This was an execution, a written decree that this fragile life did not deserve to exist. I looked into its eyes. No struggle, no pleading looks like most dogs would give. Just a hollow emptiness. I had seen that gaze before, on the battlefield, in a young soldier who knew the medevac would never come. The gaze of surrender, of someone who believed the world had already given up. My chest tightened. My hands trembled, not from the cold, but from a deep, rising anger. I knew one thing. If I stood up and walked away, I'd be complicit with that cardboard, and I couldn't. I leaned down, reaching slowly toward it. "It's okay, baby. I'm not here to hurt you." My voice cracked through the rain. It didn't move, didn't try to crawl away, just shivered in waves, breaths sharp like knives. I slid my fingers under the nylon cord, cutting into its flesh. The rope had sunk so deep it clung like dried wounds. I pulled a small knife from my pocket. Each slice made it flinch, closing its eyes, enduring in silence. When the last loop of rope fell free, I dropped the knife and scooped the tiny body up. God, it was as light as a wet rag, skin stretched over bones, ribs sharp beneath my palm. But the moment my hand brushed its belly, I went rigid. Hard as stone. Death was already crouched inside. It opened its eyes and looked at me, not begging, not pleading, just asking in silence, "Are you sure? Are you sure you want to carry me?" Tears filled my eyes. I pressed it against my chest, whispering through broken breath, "If the world says you're not worth saving, then let me be the one who proves it wrong." I stripped off my heavy coat and wrapped it around the trembling body. It didn't resist, only wheezed hot against my chest. I heard its heartbeat, fragile, erratic, like a war drum struck off rhythm. Each beat sounded like a cry for help. I rose, clutching it tight, and ran toward the car parked at the end of the street. Rain whipped my face, cold slicing into my bones, but I felt nothing except its shallow breaths against me. I yanked the door open and laid it on the passenger seat, still swaddled in my coat. Its eyes were half closed, as if ready to let go at any moment. I pulled the seatbelt across its frail body, fastening it like a promise. "You're safe now," You're not going anywhere without me." I paused, staring down at it, eyelids barely open. And I knew being alive at this moment wasn't by chance. This was a race I couldn't afford to lose. I turned the key, the engine roared, and the rescue began. I pressed my foot hard on the gas, the tires spraying rainwater across the street. The steering wheel trembled in my grip, the windshield fogging with the heat of my breath. On the passenger seat, the little Doberman shook with each ragged breath, her eyes half closed, her belly swollen under my coat. I stretched out my left hand, keeping it pressed against her tiny chest, not just to comfort her, but to make sure she was still breathing. The red light at the intersection ahead flared. I hit the brakes, the car jerking to a stop. A line of vehicles was stacked up. My heart pounded wildly. Her breathing rasped, each inhale more broken than the last. I bent down, whispering, "Stay with me, baby girl. Don't you dare leave me now. Not here, not like this." In the rearview mirror, I caught the man in the car behind me waving his arm, leaning on the horn. He couldn't see, couldn't understand, couldn't hear the dying breaths right beside me. To him, I was just an old woman hesitating at a red light in a beat-up car. I clenched the wheel. The light stayed red, but I couldn't wait. I drew a long breath, then swerved. Horns exploded behind me, but I didn't care. This wasn't about traffic laws. This was about life or death. The rain thickened, pounding on the roof in a furious rhythm. The wipers slashed back and forth, each sweep like a knife cutting into the time we had left. I glanced down at the seat. She whimpered, breathing hoarse and shallow, her belly rising and falling in strange spasms. My hands trembled as I tightened the coat around her fragile body. "Just a little longer. Just hold on. I'm taking you to someone who can help." I knew exactly where I was headed. Dr. Emily Rhodes's clinic, an old friend I had once served alongside in the military. Emily had saved the nearly impossible cases. Service dogs torn apart in combat, stray cats hanging by a thread. If anyone had a chance of saving this life, it was her. I turned sharply onto the narrow road that led to the main avenue. Street lights gleamed on the puddles, shattered reflections like broken mirrors. My hand stayed pressed to her distended belly, feeling each violent spasm. A faint metallic stench seeped through the coat, the smell of something eating away at her tiny body. A sudden curve jolted the car. She slid, her head knocking against the seat. I panicked, reaching out to steady her, cupping her head in my palm. Her body convulsed once, then went terrifyingly still. My heart stopped cold. I shook her gently, my voice breaking. "No, no, no. Not yet. Breathe, sweetheart, please, breathe." For a moment, the world fell silent. Only the rain and the deathly stillness in the car remained. Then, suddenly, her chest rose again, weak, uneven, but there. I burst into tears, my sobs mingling with the rain. I whispered, "That's it, baby girl. That's it. Don't give up on me. We're almost there." The clock neared 8 a.m. Portland's streets were filling with traffic. I weaved between cars, leaving a trail of angry horns behind. In my mind, that cardboard sign flashed again. Not worth saving. I bit my lip, whispering like a vow, "You are worth saving. More than they will ever know." At last, the faded blue sign of the clinic appeared at the end of the road, tucked behind an abandoned gas station. I pulled hard to the curb, slammed the brake, and leapt from the driver's seat. Rushing around, I gathered the small bundle in my coat. She barely had the strength to open her eyes, her breath thin as thread. I pressed my lips close to her ear and murmured, "We made it. Just a few more steps, baby. Just a few more." I pushed open the clinic door. The bell jingled. The sharp smell of disinfectant and new latex gloves hit me like a memory from my medic days. Emily looked up from her desk, her gray-blue eyes widening as she saw me carrying a trembling pup with a grotesquely swollen belly. "Margaret! Oh my God! Put her here, quick!" She pointed straight to the cold steel exam table. I lay the pup down, keeping my hand on her head. Emily pulled on gloves, bent over and pressed gently around the belly. Her face hardened. "Her belly's hard as stone. There's a mass, at least the size of an orange. Could be infected. Could rupture any time. Margaret, this is very bad." I bit down hard, gripping the pup's paw. Her breath was hoarse, faint, but still there. I looked at Emily, my voice raw but steady. "Then we fight. Whatever it takes, we fight." Emily slid her hand along the pup's belly, each press making her let out a hoarse whimper. I stood tight against the table, my hand never leaving her head, my heart nodding with every movement Emily made. Finally, Emily looked up, pulled off her gloves, her eyes turning grave. "Margaret," she said, her voice lowered. "This isn't just swelling. There's a solid mass inside, dense, immovable, about the size of an orange, maybe larger. It's pressing on her stomach, liver, maybe even her heart. She's dangerously weak. If we don't intervene, she won't last the day, maybe not even hours." I swallowed hard, my eyes leaving Emily's face, falling back to the trembling body on the cold steel table. Her tiny chest rose unevenly, that swollen belly like a curse hanging over her. Emily went on. "Surgery is the only option. But listen to me. Anesthesia alone could stop her heart. She's too young, too frail. The risk is extremely high." The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, each sound blending with the pup's fractured breathing. I had been used to gunfire, explosions, and the cries of the wounded, but never had I felt so helpless as in that moment, over a creature no bigger than my hand. I turned to Emily, my voice trembling yet firm. "So you're saying if we do nothing, she dies, and if we try, she still might die, but at least she has a chance." Emily gave a small nod. Her gray-blue eyes carried the exhaustion of thousands of surgeries before this, cases where she had been forced to choose between hope and harsh reality. I drew in a long breath, my hand gripping the damp fur on the pup's head. I whispered, almost to myself, "I buried my husband 4 years ago. I walked out of that hospital with nothing but silence waiting at home. I'm not walking away again. Not from her." Emily studied me for a moment, then nodded once. Familiar, like the nod we used to share in uniform, when others backed off and we stepped forward. "All right," she said, her voice steady. "We'll prep her now. But Margaret, you need to understand. Once we start, there's no turning back." I bent low, pressing my forehead to her burning little head, whispering, "Hear me, baby girl. They said you're not worth saving. But I'm here to prove them wrong. You're not leaving me tonight. Not like this." A faint whimper rose from her throat, like an answer. My tears fell, soaking into her black and tan fur. Emily called out to the nurse. "Anesthesia machine, surgical kit, IV line, antibiotics. Now." Footsteps rushed. The rattle of metal, the rip of plastic gloves breaking open. The small room turned into the battlefield I once knew. Tense, urgent. Life and death counted in seconds. They placed the anesthesia mask over her muzzle. I kept my hand on her head, my voice shaking. "Hang on, sweetheart. Breathe with me. Just one more breath. Just one more." Her fragile eyelids fluttered, then closed tight. The monitor began its first beeps, each one pounding like a drum inside my chest. I stepped back, letting Emily take over. She glanced at me, her look stern yet gentle. "Margaret, you can't be in here. I'll come out the moment there's news." I nodded, my hand finally leaving that trembling body. I stepped into the hallway, my legs buckling as I dropped onto the old wooden chair. The surgery door swung shut, and I was left alone, listening to the steady beep through the wall, each one like a knife cut, reminding me that time was not on our side. In that moment, I knew. Only one choice remained, to believe that she wanted to live, and to be here waiting for the moment she proved it. I sat in the narrow hallway, my back pressed against the blotched gray wall, my hands clenched so tightly together the knuckles had turned white. The operating room door was shut, letting out only the cold glare of halogen lights and the steady beep, beep of the monitor inside. Each sound struck my chest like a hammer. I had once waited outside an operating room when Richard, my husband, underwent heart surgery. I remembered the sound of footsteps, the doctor emerging with a face weighted in sorrow. That time, I lost him. Today, I could not let history repeat itself, not with this tiny life. The second hand on the wall clock crept forward, mocking me. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Inside, I heard the clatter of instruments, Emily's sharp commands muffled through the door. I bowed my head, whispering a prayer. Lord, if you're listening, don't take her away. Not after everything she's already suffered. Let me carry this one more time. Please. Suddenly, a long, piercing tone broke through. Beep. My heart detonated inside my chest. I shot to my feet, my hand gripping the door handle. Emily's voice cut through, tense and urgent. She's crashing! Crash cart! Now! I froze, my fingers trembling as they slipped from the handle. My whole body went cold. For a few seconds, everything shattered. Then, in the chilling silence, a weak beep returned. Then another. I dropped my head against the wall, tears spilling down my cheeks. The door swung open. A nurse poked her head out, blonde hair pulled tight, whispering, "She's back. Blood pressure is holding. They're still in." Then the door closed again, leaving me in a fresh whirlpool of dread. I sank into the chair, burying my face in my hands. The image of the rain-soaked cardboard with "not worth saving" burned in my mind, fueling the fire in my chest. I whispered to myself, "No, you don't get to write her ending. Not while I'm here." Time stretched into eternity. The sound of rain outside blended with the machines inside, twisting into a distorted symphony of waiting. I lost track, 10 minutes, 20, or maybe a lifetime. Until finally, the door opened again. Emily stepped out. Sweat streaked her face, her mask pulled down, her eyes tired yet lit with a spark of hope. Her gloves were stained deep red. "Margaret," she said softly, "we got it out. A sebaceous mass, infected, nearly the size of an orange. It hadn't spread to the liver. We flushed the cavity, closed her up, and started antibiotics directly." I held my breath, clutching the edge of the chair. "Now," Emily went on, "the rest is up to her. She has to choose to live." I nodded, my voice nearly gone. "Can I see her?" Emily managed a weary smile. "Yes, go in." I stepped into the operating room. The white light stung my eyes, the smell of antiseptic and blood pulling me straight back to my medic years. But in the middle of it all, on the recovery pad, lay the tiny Doberman, her belly wrapped in white bandages, an IV line taped to her foreleg, her breaths faint but present. I dragged a plastic chair close, sat beside her, and placed my hand on her head. Cold, damp, fragile. I leaned down and whispered, "You made it through the fire, sweetheart. Now there's only one thing left. You have to want to stay." The monitor kept beeping in rhythm, like a distant drum. I closed my eyes, letting my breath fall in time with hers, praying that somewhere inside she would hear me and cling to life. In the silence of that sterile room, I realized I had given my whole heart to this fight, and from now on, I would not leave her side, no matter what came. I sat on the hard plastic chair beside the recovery table, the white glare of the halogen lights casting a cold sheen across the room. My breath and the steady beep, beep of the monitor were the only rhythms of life I had to hold on to. In front of me, the little Doberman lay motionless, her tiny body half covered by a thin blanket, her belly wrapped in white bandages, an IV line in her foreleg like a fragile thread tying her to this world. I placed my hand on her head, my fingers trembling, feeling the damp chill of her thin fur. "You made it through the surgery, sweetheart. That was the hardest part," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Now, all that's left is choosing to stay." She gave no response. Her eyes stayed closed, chest rising in shallow, uneven rhythm, every breath like a blade slicing the air. I drew a deep breath, wiped my tears on my sleeve, and stepped out. A few minutes later, I returned, holding a small foam cup filled with hot chicken broth. It was the recipe I had trusted for years, the same I had given old, sick army dogs, a taste that could stir hope even in the tiredest soul. I sat down, dipped a small spoon into the golden liquid, let it cool, and held it near her muzzle. The faint aroma drifted, mingling with the sharp scent of antiseptic. I kept the spoon steady. No urging, no words. Just waiting. 1 minute passed. Then 2. My arm went numb from holding still. My heart wrung dry. I whispered, almost in prayer, "If you can hear me, baby girl, give me a sign. Just one sign." Suddenly, a faint shiver rippled through her tiny body. Her nose twitched, then stilled. I held my breath. And then, her pale pink tongue brushed the spoon, just once, weak as a passing breeze. I broke into tears. Not sobs, but a hot rush of tears spilling down my hand that held the spoon. I bowed my head, whispering, "That's it. That's it, sweetheart. You chose to fight." Emily stood in the doorway, her mask lowered, her eyes glistening. "Margaret," she said softly, "you just did something medicine can't." I turned toward her but didn't answer. I only lifted the spoon again to her muzzle. This time her tongue lingered, licked once more, longer, slower. In that room, heavy with antiseptic and filled with the steady hum of the monitor, I knew we had just won our first battle. The next day, I came to the clinic at dawn, before Emily even unlocked the doors. I pulled my chair close to the recovery crate, Richard's old book in my hand. I read aloud, page by page, not sure she could hear, but at least the room was no longer filled with sterile silence. On the third day, when I entered, I heard a faint sound. Her ears flicked at my footsteps. Her eyes stayed shut, but her tiny body recognized the presence it had learned to trust. I sat down, spoon of chicken broth in hand. This time I didn't wait long. As soon as the spoon neared, her tongue licked once, and then again. Each time she did, I felt a new heartbeat inside me, like both of us were learning to live again. By the 5th day, when I set down a bowl of thin porridge, she opened her eyes. Brown and dark, they met mine, tired yet alert, like a small flame flaring after a long night. She ate spoonful after spoonful from my hand. When the last bite was gone, I saw her tail twitch. Just once, trembling. But to me it was a symphony of trust. I stood, my eyes blurred, my chest tightening. In that moment, I understood. It wasn't just that she was learning to trust me. I was learning to trust myself again, to believe that sometimes, in a world so merciless, a life can be reclaimed by nothing more than unhesitating love. 3 weeks after the surgery, the little Doberman was no longer the fragile shadow on that operating table. I called her Shadow, because from the very first moment, she clung to me like my own shadow. Her black and tan coat had started to shine again, the wound on her belly sealed beneath its white bandage, and in her eyes, for the first time, I saw a light I thought had been extinguished forever. Life. But the third-floor apartment where I lived was far too small. Every day I carried Shadow down 3 flights of stairs just so she could breathe a little outdoor air. I felt her heartbeat quicken at the door, her legs twitching as if she longed to run, to touch real grass, but she was confined by the short leash and the cold slab of concrete. One night, I found her pressed against the small window, eyes fixed on the patch of grass glowing under the streetlight. In those eyes, I saw more than curiosity. I saw the hunger for freedom. I stood behind her, my hand clutching my coat pocket, my chest tightening. A whisper rose inside me. If I keep her locked in these 4 walls, am I not becoming the same person who threw her into that sack? The next morning, I opened my laptop and typed, "House for rent, fenced yard, Portland." My heart raced like a young girl's. 3 days later, I signed the lease on a small wooden house on the city's edge. The house was old, its blue paint faded, dry ivy clinging to the porch, but behind it stretched a yard of open grass, wrapped in a sturdy fence. To me, it was paradise. On moving day, Shadow stood at the doorway, her nose testing the new air, her legs pausing as if she couldn't believe it. I unclipped the leash, crouched down, my hand resting on her shoulder. "Go on, little warrior. The world is yours now." At first, she stepped slowly, carefully, nose skimming the grass, ears pricked high. Then suddenly, like a switch had been thrown, she took off. Those once bony legs now carried her with startling strength, racing across the yard, circling the fence, then back again, carving wild, perfect loops of freedom. I stood frozen, watching every stride, my heart breaking open. Sunlight burst through the clouds, pouring across her sleek black coat until it shimmered like liquid gold. The wind caught her ears, her tail wagging with all its might. What undid me wasn't her speed or her strength. It was that she never once looked back. Shadow ran as if she finally believed it. I would always be there. I would never abandon her. I covered my face, tears streaming freely. It had been so long since I'd cried like that. Not from loss, but from pure, unshaken joy. The image of that rain-soaked sack with its cruel message not worth saving flashed through my mind, then dissolved in the blaze of sunlight. Shadow stopped in the middle of the yard, panting, her tongue hanging out, her eyes glittering bright. She looked at me, not with the hollow gaze of that broken pup, but with the fire of a warrior who had fought her way back to life. I ran down into the yard, dropped to my knees and wrapped my arms around her. Her warmth flowed into me, filling the hollow ache I'd carried ever since Richard died 4 years ago. "Welcome home," I whispered into her ear, my voice breaking. That evening I sat on the wooden steps, watching Shadow stretched out on the grass as the golden sunset spilled over us both. And I realized this house wasn't just a home for her. It was a beginning for me, too. A place no longer haunted by loss, but alive with the present. In the soft glow of twilight, I whispered silently to Richard, "We did it, love. We saved her. And maybe she saved me, too." Autumn drifted into the city with crisp winds and yellow leaves scattered across the yard. One morning, while I was cleaning out the old shed, I heard a rustling behind me. When I turned, I saw Shadow carrying something in her mouth. She walked slowly toward me and laid it at my feet. I looked down. My hands froze. It was the water-stained cardboard, its edges curled, the ink still blurred yet unmistakable. Not worth saving. My breath caught. I thought I had thrown it away with all the painful memories, but somehow it had been shoved deep into an old box. Shadow stood watching me, no bark, no wag of her tail, just calm, steady eyes, as if to say, "This doesn't own me anymore. Let's finish it." I sank down, my hands trembling as they touched the damp, moldy board. Tears welled in my eyes. Memories surged back, the torn sack, the labored breaths, the swollen belly, the hollow stare. I whispered, "They tried to end you with this." Shadow placed one small paw on the edge of the cardboard, holding it steady, then lifted her head to look at me. It wasn't a plea for rescue. It was the gaze of a warrior who had already won. I stood and walked to the porch. In the old drawer, I pulled out the lighter Richard once used on camping trips. My hand shook violently. I looked down at Shadow and asked softly, "What should we do with it, girl?" Shadow stepped forward, placing both paws on the board, then raised her eyes to me. They were unwavering, as if giving me the answer. I struck the lighter. A small blue flame flared, catching the corner of the cardboard. Slowly, the letters blurred, then disappeared into ash. The wind rose, carrying it all away, the judgment, the cruelty, the death sentence someone had once tried to pin on her life. I covered my face and cried, but this time not from pain, from release. I bent down, laid my hand on Shadow's head, feeling the warmth spread beneath my palm. I whispered, "This thing never gets to speak for you again. You were always worth saving." That afternoon I printed a photo, Shadow, the first time she ran free, ears flying, eyes blazing, her mouth open like a smile. I framed it and set it on the table by the front door. Beneath it, I wrote in my own hand, "Absolutely worth saving." That evening, I sat in my old armchair as darkness softened around the little house. Shadow leapt up, curling into my lap just as she had on the first night after surgery. Her head rested against my chest, her warm, steady breath rising and falling. I stroked behind her ear, feeling her heartbeat, strong and certain. A tear slipped down my cheek onto her back. Not the sorrowful tears of losing Richard, but tears of gratitude, grateful that I had arrived in time, grateful that Shadow had chosen to stay, grateful that in a cold, ruthless world, there could still be small moments strong enough to save a soul. I whispered into the quiet, as if speaking to Richard, "We saved her, and maybe she saved me too." I looked down at Shadow, her tail twitching in her sleep, as if she had heard it too. As I held her, breathing softly and peacefully in my arms, more tears slid down my face. No more torn sacks, no more cardboard scrawled with cruel words. Only a small life that had been loved and an old heart like mine learning to beat again. And I thought, perhaps the world is harsh by nature, but sometimes all it takes is one hand reaching out, and everything can change. I have lost much in my life, but the day I saved Shadow, I found a part of myself again. And now I want to ask you, have you ever saved a dog's life? If you have, please share your story. Let it become a flame of hope for those in despair. Let our love spread wide so no dog is ever left behind, ever left to shiver in fear or loneliness again. Because sometimes when we save a life, we are saving our own hearts too.